Tim Moen. I'm the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. I'm a filmmaker, I'm a firefighter, I put wet stuff on red stuff, and that's who I am.
I'm Walter Block. I'm a professor of economics at Loyola University, and that's in New Orleans, which is far away from Vancouver. But I used to work for the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, and my family lives here, so I sort of have a bi-coastal marriage. So I'm here in the summer, Christmas, Easter, almost half a year. And I teach economics, and my claim to fame is I once shook the hand of Ludwig von Mises, and I never washed my hands since. So if you shake hands with me, you channel Mises. That's my claim to fame.
And I'm Victor Pross. I go by the moniker of, or I've been dubbed with the moniker of anarchist artist. I'm one of those very few artsy fartsies who's not on the left. Far from it. I'm not even on the right, for that matter. And I've had the great privilege of shaking the hand of Walter Block, and I'm never going to wash it again.
I just wanted to pick up on what Victor said. He's not on the right and he's not on the left.
Nice. Yeah.
And I think that's a crucially important point, that we libertarians are different. Sometimes we're conflated with the right. I'm not sure why we're more conflated with the right than with the left, and it really doesn't matter. But we are conflated with the right, and I wouldn't say I resent it. Well, maybe I do resent it because I favor accuracy. Sure. And libertarianism is a unique, different thing. The right tends to be reasonably good on economics, although not any better than they should be. But they're horrible on personal liberties, such as legalizing drugs. Harper is venomous on drugs and prostitution. You know, they say that they want to change the prostitution law to make it safer for the sex workers or the prostitutes. Well, I think that's okay, but how about the Johns too? Anything between consenting adults, which doesn't mean that we libertarians favor prostitution or favor marijuana use, just that people shouldn't be put in jail for that, because we want to reserve being put in jail for violating the libertarian axiom or the non-aggression principle. You know, keep your mitts to yourself. Don't grab other people or their property without their permission. Victor said last night, if you're in the boxing ring and somebody hits somebody, well, that's with permission. I mean, you get in the boxing ring and, and you permit people to hit you above the belt, not bite your ear, but hit you above the belt. So we libertarians are really a third force, or very different. You know, sometimes we'll take these tests to see what our political views are. Sure. And, you know, typically we'll all say on economics we're on the right, and personal liberties we're on the left, so therefore we're moderates. Well, not really.
Not exactly. No, we're well, and you know, one of the things that put me on the map essentially was this meme, or the slogan that we came up with, that said, I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that got me play on CNN, Fox Business, Gawker Magazine made fun. This hour is 22 minutes. Our version of, you know, like the Daily Show with Jon Stewart made fun of me. So I kind of felt like I hit it with that phrase. But that perfectly encapsulates this idea that, yeah, we're not the left or the right. We can equally piss them off or attract them, right? You know, and so my goal as leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada is to try to attract people to our message. And, you know, one of the things we're trying to brand ourselves at is we're better conservatives than the conservatives, and we're better liberals than the liberals. You know, at the end of the day, my comprehension of liberal and conservative values is that they're simply languages people talk. You know, conservatives tend to focus on civility versus barbarism, and they see that, their worldview in that. You know, the left tends to see things in terms of oppressors versus oppressed. Libertarians tend to see things as compulsion versus freedom. And so I think it's important to understand, when you're talking to an audience, who are the audience you're talking to. Are they left people? While you talk in their language, oppressors versus oppressed. Explain how the state oppresses. And wouldn't it be great if we could solve these problems without pointing guns at people, right? You don't want to, you tell me you're anti-gun, you don't want guns, and yet you're telling me that you want to point guns at people to solve this problem that can we put down the guns and figure out a way to solve this problem peacefully? And on the right, of course, you know, is it really law and order to, you know, to inflict all this pain and suffering and ruin lives in these farmers, especially around this area in Vancouver, who are growing cannabis, who are growing plants, who are growing medicine, who are growing things that people value? Is it really a conservative value to? Is Is it law and order to use big government to miss out on a huge opportunity economically, and to spend all this money, creating all this chaos, creating criminal elements? You're creating crime. So, I think that we can appeal to both parties, and both liberals and conservatives can come under the libertarian ballot. You can be concerned primarily about conservative issues as long as you don't want to use force to solve those problems. You can be concerned primarily with liberal issues as long as you don't want to use force. So we are kind of an umbrella that welcomes everyone. We're very inclusive, and this is why we have drag queens and fundamentalist Christians and all sorts of people who would never associate with each other, but all working together to support each other's right to live the lives they want to live.
Yeah, and you were like just following up on this whole thing of the drug prohibition and prostitution and whatnot. Somebody asked me last night, in fact, libertarian, anarchist, I've heard these terms thrown around. Sometimes they're thrown around interchangeably. And somebody asked me, what's the difference between that? And I thought, well, a libertarian, I guess for the most part, could be somebody who believes in a limited government, but is very strong advocate of free markets and free association. So a libertarian of that persuasion might be somebody who's would be favor, the government getting out of that business and to even regulate it and to tax it, and to make it safe, and where the prostitutes have to get testing so they don't transmit diseases and whatnot. And that could very well be a libertarian point of view, right? So, which kind of I think conflicts with an anarchist position, though, because even though now it's legalized,
right?
And people are smoking weed either for recreational or medicinal purposes. That's up to them, right? But it would be another tax revenue.
Sure.
And that's some people who consider themselves very, very broad-minded and very libertarian, going, that's, I'd favor that. That becomes a good thing to tax that, right? But I would be at odds with that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think we want to legalize marijuana in spite of the fact that they'll tax it and they'll have more money, because my view, I think I speak for all of us, is the government's got too much money as it is. They don't need any more money, but some people say that it's a reason to legalize that the government will have more money, and we would just go the opposite way. But it's not just these esoteric, controversial things like drugs and sex, it's also milk. If you produce milk and they don't want you to because you don't have the quota or whatever it is to produce milk, you can go to jail for producing milk. I mean, before we started this, we were talking. You guys went to bed late, and I was joking and saying the government's got to get in and make sure you go to sleep.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a nanny state that happily doesn't go into your bedroom to make sure you're going to sleep on time, but it goes into your bedroom for sexual purposes. It goes into your bathroom for drug purposes, and goes in your kitchen about milk. And if you want to hire someone and pay them $3 an hour, you can go to jail for that, even though the person is willing to work for $3 an hour. Talking about the minimum wage. So it's sort of what is it? The fish isn't aware of the water because he's in the water. Canadians and Americans and most people aren't aware of the government because the government is sort of like water. It's all over the place, and we're just not aware of how deeply and widely the government affects us.
Yeah. You speak of the nanny state, Walter. That's a very interesting thing. That kind of reminds me of a part of my talk last night. Is stressing a great deal of importance on definitions, because a lot of people if they had a firm definition of what government is, as opposed to their projections, their psychological projections of what the government should be, as opposed to what it is. Everybody's got their little fantasy psychological profile what the government is all about. Look, they should legalize that, and they should pass this law, and and welfare reform. The government should do A, B, and C. As opposed to just look at it what it is and not what it should do.
Yeah, and one of the things that I often tell people is, so you think the government should make this illegal or that illegal? Well, would you be willing to point a gun at a person and put that person in your basement, confine them to a cage for smoking marijuana?
Yeah.
Well, no, I would never do that. Oh my God, that's terrible. Why are you asking someone else to do it? I would have more respect for you if you actually practice what you preach here, and if you actually had the integrity to do that yourself. But instead, you ask someone far removed from you to do it on your behalf. That strikes me as a little bit dastardly.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, I'll ask you and you, Walter. Like, it seems to me like, and maybe this is hardly like an original thought, but like, there's a lot of people who do deify the state as if it was like this floating,
Sure.
amorphous force, Star Trek voice coming from somewhere, as opposed to just being an aggregate of people, right? So it's like the state. It sounds like this mighty leviathan, though, and that's what I was when I showed that dopey caricature super state with the cape and the diapers and things like this. It's just kind of like, this is what you're pledging your allegiance to.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and to me, it's like, everyone has a different. Everyone who is a theist has a different conception of God. Every person on earth who believes in God has a different conception and projects onto God whatever they want to. And that I find the same thing happens with the state. It's very difficult to pin down a definition. And so that's why I said last night, I'm starting to, wrestle with this idea that we already live in a stateless society. There's no such thing as the state. It's not this, there's no deity called the state. So what exists in reality? Well, there's a group of individuals over there behaving badly. Why are they doing that? There's a group of individuals on that imaginary line we call the border, stopping people, frisking people. Why are they doing that? It's not because an actual border exists. It's not like there's a physical thing there that they're protecting. It's a mental model that they're protecting. It's something in their brain. It's a deity in a sense. And so, to me, it's important to understand, like you say, get to the definition. What exactly are we talking about? When you say government's doing this or that, what are you talking about? Because a lot of people, for example, on the left, imagine government to be this kind of compassionate committee of people who try to just solve problems and do things charitably. And so, well, how does that differ from an actual charity or, another organization?
Yeah, private charity is slightly different.
Right. They don't have the guns, right?
Right.
You say you don't like guns, but yet you keep wanting them to use guns.
I wanted to pick up on something Tim said before about when you're in a left-wing audience, stress caringness or whatever, and when you're in a right-wing audience, stress, obedience or
law and order.
Yeah. And that's an interesting, it sort of opens up the whole question of not what libertarianism is, but how to best to promote it or how best to convince people of it. And I'm an Austrian economist in addition to a libertarian, and one of the elements of Austrian economics is subjectivism, namely different strokes for different folks. And different people try different ways of converting people, and that's one way. Right. Namely, tailor the message to the group. And, I'm not against it. I think that it'll work for some people. Ron Paul, for example, doesn't do that. He just sort of, hits them right between the eyes on whatever it is, and it's the same thing. You go to his lectures in this group and that group and that group, it's invariable. Sure. Whereas other people try it that way. And I'm not saying which one is right. I'm saying that neither one is right. That it all depends upon the person who's speaking. You might be more comfortable saying turning left and turning right, or emphasizing left-wing and right-wing concerns. Ron Paul might not be. You might be a different view, and some left-wing people might say, "Well, I resent the fact that you're tailoring it to us. You're pandering us. You're not saying the same thing in both groups." So, to me, it's sort of an empirical issue or a mystery or something. Right. What is the best way of doing it? The two people, to my mind, that have converted more people to libertarianism than anyone else are Ayn Rand and Ron Paul, and they were very different. Not so much in ideology. The ideology was pretty similar, but in presentation.
Sure.
I remember one time with that British comedic group, one guy was slapping another guy with a fish. Monty Python.
Oh, yeah.
That's more like Ayn Rand.
Right.
She smacks people with a fish right in the face. Whereas Ron Paul is much more gentle in personal demeanor.
Sure.
And yet the two of them are, I would say, almost opposites in terms of converting people. And yet they're they've been the most successful of
Sure.
any two people I can think of. I mean, there are other people that I think that have maybe made more of a contribution to the theory, such as Murray Rothbard or Ludwig von Mises, but their effect was not so much among the vast number of people. It was just more intellectuals and university professors and people like that.
Rand was more of a popularizer of it, you know. You know, somebody was. I've heard this. I heard like a critique last night, and I've heard it you know, here and there. And probably you guys have heard it too, where a lot of people go, "Well, you know, the non-aggression principle is all well and good, but you raise it on such a pedestal. You know, it just tells you it's just negative in content. It just tells you what not to do. How is that a moral guide or a moral compass or a moral system? You know, of positive affirmations and." You know, and I was basically saying, you know, if we do call it the non-aggression axiom, you have to start somewhere where something that's irrefutable is just it's a given, right?
Yeah.
You have to start from somewhere, right? So, but I think that it is the very center of ethics, of having any kind of ethical system that you have to start there, then build from that. If people take, let's say that, you know, the welfare state, people considered like a distribution and charity and things like that, right? So they're violating the non-aggression principle, but they placed something could be considered very moral, is to be giving and benevolent and charitable and things like that. So that's their focus. That's what they're focusing on. But never mind the non-aggression principle, because this becomes the focus now, right? So if you don't start there as your foundation, you go askew.
Yeah, well, and to me, it you know, it comes back to, you know, how I said last night, I've kind of come full circle on the whole religion thing, because, you know, as I got into libertarianism and then anarchism because of my skepticism towards the faith of my childhood. And, you know, I've rediscovered some of the religious traditions, but I approach them from a secular place now. So, in other words, I'm coming from kind of an A position. In other words, I don't believe there's a big guy in the sky or any kind of magic going on.
When you say A position, you mean the prefix to atheism,
right? Yeah.
Anarchism.
So it's a position of non-belief. The starting point is I'm assuming there's no God, and I'm assuming that there's no afterlife, and that this is my only shot. And now, what ought I to do? And in my exploration of that, I discovered, well, there's some, you know, scientific reasons and research behind practicing certain types of meditation and thinking thoughts of gratitude, and not looking at the Facebook trolls first thing in the morning, you know, haranguing me and having a lousy day thereafter, but spending some time, just 2 minutes, thinking about all the things I'm grateful for, and that opens up the mind. It removes negativity and stress. There's plenty of research behind this, and one of the first things they teach you when you pray is give thanks. That's the first thing you do. And so I think there's elements of religion that work. There's elements of the church, for example, that work, bringing people into community. What's actually going on? If they're not praying to a deity, if they're just talking out loud to each other and themselves, and they're singing together, is there something positive about that? And I think there is something positive about that. It's just that when you add in the irrationality and there's a potential for things to go astray. And I think it's the same when it comes to the non-aggression principle. So if you know, want to build roads, and if you want to help the poor, and if you want to do all these things, that's great. But, you know, again, can we do it without the aggression? Can we start with the A position and get to there? So, and now it's interesting to me, because now, you know, I'm doing this thing that might be called prayer in the morning, and I'm gone from being a disavowed, you know, I don't want to engage in political actions, and I'm a purist, to, you know, maybe there's some you know, legitimacy to standing on the political stage and engaging in this theater and doing the thing, because that's where people look. So to me, it's kind of like now I'm standing up back on the pulpit of a church and talking to people about how maybe they can be spiritual without God, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, you're following and you're modeling yourself after Ron Paul in that regard, don't you think?
Well, I guess, I mean, well, those were the two words that convinced me to get involved in politics, right? You can't deny that the guy brought people the message of liberty. So now the thing I struggle with, of course, is, you know, facing criticism for is, you know, we're kind of moving the platform away to something that scares the heck out of people, which is, you know, we're going to get into government and then fire everyone and rip up all the rules. and we're moving to, okay, what, instead of having kind of a philosophical treatise on what liberty is, you know, in our platform, have an actual platform of what could we do to start repealing the state if we were to form government, a libertarian government tomorrow. what are the steps we could take? Well, obviously we can't just fire everyone and, you know, rip up the rule. Well, maybe, Walter, we can. I don't know. You probably tell me we can, but that scares people, and I don't think we're going to get a seat if we do that. But I think that, you know, my current thinking, and I'm not dogmatic about this, and I'm willing to be corrected. Feel free to correct me. Is that we can refer to the principles of liberty and say that, look, liberty is a process. There's no end point called libertopia. We're never going to reach any kind of utopia. It's a trajectory, and even if we reach a society that we might call anarchic, in other words, there's no initiatory force being used or very little force being used, is there still more liberty to be had? I think there is, and I think that guys like us three are still going to be on the outside saying, listen guys, we can do better. You know, for example, you could imagine an ANCAP society where the first thing that goes through a person's mind when someone comes onto their lawn is, can I use protective force? Am I justified in using protective force right now to repel this invader? Well, another question might be, that might be one society where a tipping point of people have that as their first inclination, that question in their mind. Another society where people respect property rights and recognize other people's properties is curiosity. Why is this person on my lawn? Like, what's going through this person's mind? Like, trying to empathize with the person instead of, can I pull my gun out now, right? So those are two, that's just an example of how we
that sounds like something a troll would say, like, oh, can I shoot somebody who steps on my property?
Right,
well,
right,
they were delivering
the 12-step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, they say they have no position on outside issues. That's one of their axioms, I guess. Well, we libertarians, I think, have no position on outside issues too. The non-aggression principle that's it. And, people say, well, then what can I do? And the answer is, do anything you damn well please. Just keep your mitts off of other people and their property against their will. The issue of religion is an outside issue. Ayn Rand was not really a libertarian. She was an objectivist.
Yeah.
That's what she said. And part of objectivism was atheism. Yeah. So the venom of atheism is somehow infiltrated into libertarianism. And I happen to be an atheist, but I'm not a
militant.
Not a militant atheist.
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.
I think that it's an outside issue. Religious people, look, if you're going to engage in killing people because they're not believing in the right way, well, then it's not because you're a theist, it's because you're using violence against innocent people. If you're not going to do that, then you're compatible with libertarianism. So I wouldn't want it to be thought that libertarianism has any position on religion.
Right.
You can be a religious person, you can be an agnostic, you can be an atheist. We have no position on which is better, chess or checkers, either. There might be some libertarians who like chess, other people who like checkers, but it's an outside issue, so we have no position on it. Now, with regard to the guy who steps on your lawn, and here's a lawn, green brush, sure. Sort of like a lawn. I think that there is this objective thing that it would be wrong to just shoot a guy for stepping on your lawn, because what you're supposed to do, the way I understand the non-aggression principle, is to remove the trespass in the most gentlest manner possible. Yeah. So if a guy is stepping on your lawn, you might say something like, sir, do you realize you're stepping on my lawn? Please get out. And if the guy says, whoa, I didn't realize, I'm sorry, and he moves away, and you shoot him, well, you're a murderer. On the other hand, if he says, well, F your lawn, I'm parking my tent here, and the hell with you, and you start pushing him out, and now he's doing more than just trespassing on your lawn, so you have a right to escalate. So I think that there's a right and a wrong way. I'm not a subjectivist on law. I'm a subjectivist on economics, but on law, I think there's a right and a wrong way, and I think all libertarians should adhere to it. And as to pushing atheism versus anarchy versus other things. The way I see libertarianism, there are really four elements of it. There's the anarchist, then there's the minarchist. The anarchist says no government whatsoever. The minarchist says, well, government, but armies, courts, and police, and that's it. And the constitutionalists, like Ron Paul, would say, well, a few more other things, post offices, post roads, whatever. And then I would include classical liberals like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek as libertarians. They're not as pure. They add on a whole bunch of other things. So getting back to your point, well, what should the Libertarian Party be doing? Should it only promote anarchy? No, I think it should be a big tent. It should include all four. There was this Dallas Accord in the Libertarian Party where the anarchists and the anarchists and the archists were debating, and they came up with this accord or this compromise, and they said, look, let's not talk about anarchism in the political party because we're really far away from there.
Right.
Let's talk about reducing government.
Right.
And when we reduce government to about 5% of what it now is, then we'll bring that up and we'll start fighting about the other 5%.
Sure.
But that's just the Libertarian Party. So my advice to the Libertarian Party, and I'm a member of the Libertarian Party of the U.S., and I ran for office in 1971 before the National Party started for the New York State Assembly, and I once ran for vice president. I didn't make it of the Libertarian Party. To not promote anarchy, it's pretty radical, but to just less government and let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, and no tariffs, no minimum wage, none of this, milk boards, get rid of the milk board or whatever. So I don't think that would be the compromise. I think that would be a reasonable thing for the Libertarian Party. But the Libertarian Party is not the whole Libertarian movement. The Libertarian movement includes a lot more than the Libertarian Party. Artists, professors, free
it's a
state.
motley crew.
It's a motley crew, as someone was saying, drag queens and policemen or firemen. So I think that other people can talk about anarchism, maybe not the LP. And if the LP is asked that, you can say, well, some libertarians are anarchists. I would estimate 5% of libertarians are anarchists, but most people just want to have government, but less involvement and lower taxes and less regulation.
Yeah, and just following right on the coattails of that, that's always been the big critics hurl or the criticism hurled from objectivists is that libertarianism or anarchism is this united front of where so long as you announce the words "I believe in freedom," however that's defined, welcome, come up aboard. You get your freedom from God, Mr. Theist. Where you have to mortify the flesh and use force against people for the salvation of their individual soul. If you want to call that freedom, yeah, come on in because you said the word freedom, right? So that's always been their criticism, though. But because it's not like a homogeneous ideology, a purified ideology, right? So, but I think that's ridiculous, and I was covering that in my talk there. That they would they fear like this epistemological chaos, right? Right, and I said, everybody knows what non-aggression is. Never mind these lunatic fringe ideologues. Most people, for the most part, know what aggression is, right? Sure. And even government was sold on the basis of appealing to a volunteer standard, as I was talking about the consent of the government. There was like a concerted effort to bring in consent into the whole selling of a certain government, the American Revolution, etc. Right? So everybody knows what non-aggression is.
Sure. Yeah, and getting back to this idea of reaching kind of an endpoint that we might call anarchy. I guess part of the process of I'm trying to comprehend the minarchist position as well, right? So one of the things that comes up when we talk about platform and policy proposals with the Libertarian Party is, well, how do we conceive liberty, with the government? Is it better to promote policies that protect property rights across the board, across Canada? Or is it better to focus on decentralizing political jurisdiction into smaller and smaller units? On the one hand, you might envision, well, if you think that property rights they come from government, if you think that the best way to protect them is to have a government that does it, well, then obviously what you would want, like you said, Walter, is a one world government that enforces liberty for everyone, right? I mean, that's a logical extension. You would want to extend that, become an imperialist state that goes around, annexing barbaric, and force initiators and forcing them to become, peace-loving citizens or something like that.
Yeah, it would be a Randian government serving its proper functions.
Right. So that would be the logical extension. So obviously we're taking, we think that's probably a huge moral hazard, not going to work.
Yeah.
We're focused on ideas of how do we decentralize, how do we get government closer and closer to the individual. And I guess an anarcho-capitalist society would be the ultimate extension of that, wherein each individual is sovereign, and I guess you'd have 7 or 8 billion governments in a sense. But even then, like I say, we're not necessarily.
You're talking about the ROs.
What's that? No, I'm just talking about individuals. So an individual, if you recognize an individual as sovereign, able to govern themselves, I guess, and once
7 billion sovereignty.
Right. And I mean, in a sense, there's kind of, almost a state set up in terms of your property, your castle, your domain. You set the rules. You're kind of the ruler of that domain, and anyone that comes in there is going to have to abide by your rules to a certain extent, right? So, and I think that I think it's conceivable that once you reach that point, we haven't stopped yet, right? I mean, there might be activists that would argue that maybe there's we need to maintain that for sure. You need to keep rules in your house. You need to be the ultimate arbiter. But for example, with myself, I've seen how starting with the position of non-initiation of force in terms of parenting, for example, can unleash all sorts of creative potential. If you remove from the table the idea that you need to use punitive force, the idea of sending for timeouts or spanking or different things like that, obviously you can never remove the notion of protective force from parenting, because kids do irrational things and they put themselves in danger all the time, and for their own good you have to do things sometimes, and of course that's never done to punish them, that's done to protect them and to make sure that you deliver to their adult selves a good product. You're their custodian, right? So but this idea that I don't want government to come into my house, into someone's house, and necessarily protect children from abusive parents, right? I don't think that's the way you solve child abuse, of people using punitive force against their kids.
Yeah.
But I think it's conceivable that type of thing would happen in what we would describe as an anarcho-capitalist society. So to me, the next step would be, okay, how do we now extend this idea that children ought to have their rights protected, in a decentralized way at that point, to unleash more flourishing in society, create people with higher IQs, and have more liberty in terms of more choices available to the individual at any given moment.
Well, yeah. No, I certainly attribute personhood to children. They're just smaller people.
Sure.
And in the same sense of like grabbing a kid from running out onto a street or whatever, or making sure they don't stick the fork into the toaster, and apprehending the kid from doing that. I would very well do the same thing if there was like a giant safe that was being roped up over on a building, and then the rope breaks and it's coming hurling down, and there's Walter Block. You're damn right that I'm going to push him out of the way. You're damn
How
right.
dare you?
Right. So it's it's I think the same principle applies there, right?
Well, Milton Friedman rejected libertarianism on just that ground. He said libertarianism is wrong, the non-aggression axiom is wrong, because when Victor pushed me out of the way of the safe, or out of the way of the oncoming truck, he initiated violence against me, and yet that's okay.
Right.
Not only okay, but virtuous. I mean, you saved my life, and Milton Friedman rejects the non-aggression axiom or principle on that ground. And I would say that there are problems with his position. I think we can reconcile libertarianism with pushing people out of the way, because what you really did, even let's say you broke my rib, pushed me so hard out of the way of the safe or the truck. Well, that's okay. I'm in your debt. I mean, you saved my life. So one way to get around that is, yes, he broke my rib, but he saved my life. And if you take a life minus rib, it's still a plus. Yeah. So he didn't really initiate violence against me. That's one way to interpret that. Another way to interpret that is, well, okay, I can now sue him. Let's say I'm a real son of a gun, and I say, thanks for saving my life, but by the way, you broke my rib, and I'm suing you for breaking my rib. And probably no court, no rational court would give me much money for my rib, given this context. But even if they did, okay, well then, you're a hero. The example I sometimes use is, would it be possible for there to be a libertarian concentration camp guard, which is taking this example to the nth degree. And the stipulation is that every concentration camp guard has to kill 100 Jews or gypsies or blacks or non-Aryans a day. And I'm going to become a libertarian concentration camp guard, and I'm only going to kill 90. Why 90? Because if I kill 89 or less, they'll find me out. But if I can kill 90, they'll keep me in as a concentration camp guard. So I'm a concentration camp guard. And the reason I'm doing it is not to kill 90, but to save 10. Right. And at the end of the week, we have the Nuremberg trial. And I'm put in the dock for killing 90 times 7 or 630 people. And my response is, but I saved 70 people, namely 10 a day. And my answer is, well, if any of the heirs of any of the 600 people that I killed want me to be put to death, I have to be put to death because I am a murderer, just as you would have to pay for my broken rib. However, you guys should have a ticker tape parade for me, and you should give me a medal for being a hero, saving 70 people, and then I have to be put to death. But I would tell the people, I would say, look, I wish I could have saved your brother, your cousin, your uncle, your son, but I couldn't. I can only save 10 a day. Otherwise, I couldn't save anyone because they would find me out. Right. So please let me go because, I'm not really a murderer. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to look at the non-aggression principle in a very sophisticated way. Right. Unlike Milton Friedman, some guy pushes somebody out of the way of a truck or a safe coming down, and Milton Friedman says, well, the non-aggression principle is no good.
Is this what he was attempting to invalidate it?
No, what Milton Friedman was saying was that the non-aggression principle is not a good principle, or it has exceptions. For example, pushing me out of the way of danger. And therefore, we shouldn't be so rabid. We shouldn't be so extreme.
Right.
And I'm an extremist, even though sometimes I'm called Walter Moderate Block. I'm sitting in the middle here. I'm an extremist. I think that we should adhere to the non-aggression principle, period, no matter what the example, the counterexample is, such as the one that Victor is mentioning. And my answer is we should be sophisticated in trying to deal with this. One way is, well, it's 700 lives minus 70 for 630. Another way is a life minus a broken rib. Or, okay, so Victor is a hero. He has to pay for my broken rib. And nobody's going to really want to be my friend after this. There are going to be severe sanctions against me for being such a son of a gun to protest. I mean, the guy saved my life and he broke my rib. Come on, give me a break.
This would be a very rare person who would be that low to be an opportunist to figure that he could get something like.
But there were moral heroes, right? There were people that were, part of the Nazi party that were, concentration camp guards and different things that did their best to save Jews when they could. They put their opportunities. And to me, this comes back to, I think about this example too when I think about, the legitimacy of running for office and getting a seat in Parliament. Am I now a force initiator? And am I violating the non-aggression principle? Like someone said, well, you're calling for a 15% flat tax. That means you're a 15% thief. That doesn't sit very well with me. I don't want to be a force initiator. I don't want to be that guy, right? Yeah. And so that's something I struggle with in terms of political action. But at the same token, I think that society would be better served if we had libertarians, people that ascribe to the libertarian philosophy, the same thing that the three of us believe in very strongly in all the parties, and would that serve society? Would we be better off with those people in those positions? Now, if you're a liberal, you're very constrained in what you can say and what you can preach. You would have to be, very sneaky, right? You would have to be deceitful, conceal from your constituency the fact that you're a libertarian, that you promote the idea of liberty and speak the language of the liberal and talk, be very careful and strategic, and then pick your battles when you could and work behind the scenes and maybe try to form coalitions and say we got to kill this bill and do this thing. Is that legitimate? Is that a legitimate form of thing? Because if that's the thing, well, maybe we need more libertarians in status quo parties as well. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Well, that's a sort of a strategic issue. Should like Ron Paul ran for Libertarian Party and they got the usual 2% of the vote as president, and then he ran for president and he didn't get president, or even the GOP nomination, but he affected a lot of people.
Right.
So again, to me, that's an empirical issue. And some people are more comfortable in the Libertarian Party. Other people are more comfortable being a Libertarian in the Republican Party in the U.S. or
Right.
Conservative or the NDP or whatever it is in the Liberal Party in Canada. The other question is very interesting and important. How can you reconcile calling for a 15% flat tax, say, with the non-aggression principle? And my answer is you can't. And if you're running as an anarchist, then you're contradicting yourself.
Sure.
There's some sort of tension between those two positions. But if you're running as a minarchist and you say, look, I'm a minarchist, I favor a 15% tax, flat tax. I even favor a 10%, but I think I can get away with 15 better than...
You could be a minarchist for 6 months or whatever it is.
Well, but now if you're an anarchist, I think what you have to do is say, I don't favor a 15% tax, I favor lower taxes.
Right.
Whatever the tax is, I favor lower.
Right.
So that would be a way of reconciling it.
Sure.
But I wanted to get back onto the child thing that you mentioned also.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 children. They're probably both older than you guys. I'm a little older than you. My son is 36. My daughter is 34. I don't know how old. Maybe they're younger.
Did you say that they're older?
Maybe they're younger. Oh, you guys
no, they're younger. They're younger.
You guys look younger than our kids. And I think it's perfectly justified to use violence. A timeout is kidnapping.
Sure. Look,
I don't like the color of your shirt, blue stripes. I'm giving you a timeout. Go stand in that corner.
How dare you?
How dare you wear that shirt? My shirt is okay. Yours isn't.
Yeah.
Well, that's kidnapping. If I tell you to go there with a threat that if you don't go there, I'm going to, mash you or something. Mm-hmm. But yet we give our kids time out, and if we do it to an adult, that would be kidnapping. But kids are different. Yes, they're persons, but they're not full rights-bearing creatures yet until they become adults. And when they become adults is a continuum problem. Is it 14, 16, 18? That's a different issue. But I like the way you said it, that you want to deliver them to their adult state in good shape.
Right.
And one of the ways to do that is to give them times out, or to change their diaper, whether they want to or not, or keep them out of traffic, or keep them from sticking a fork into the toaster, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there is such a thing as child abuse. There was some case where some football player was taking a 4-year-old kid and hitting him with a stick so badly that he hit the kid in the testicles.
It really, it went viral.
I think, so now the question is, well, suppose a government cop or a private cop went into his house and said, I'm arresting you. Would he be justified? And I think so. If it was as an anarchist, here's a cop who I regard as a criminal, and here is another criminal, namely the child abuser. Look, suppose the Blood and the Crips, 2 gangs, hate each other, and now the Blood is raping some woman, and the Crips stop him. Well, I applaud the Crips. I don't applaud the Crips overall, but in that one act, I applaud the Crips. And if it was the other way around, I would applaud the Blood. So if there's a child abuser who's, again, there's a continuum. If you hit a 14-year-old kid who did something really bad, not so bad. You hit a 4-year-old kid, that's really grotesque.
Yeah, the same principle applies to sexual consent.
Right. Oh, yeah. What is statutory rape? We know that if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you're a statutory rapist, even if she gave permission.
Yeah.
Because we don't think she's capable of giving permission. You go to bed with a 25-year-old woman, and we think she is capable of giving consent, so you're not a rapist. But what about 15 or 14 or 16? There's no one right answer there. Yeah. But you can go over the line with the 5-year-old girl. You go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you're an evil monster. You engage in child abuse, you're an evil monster. And if the cop or the private cop or the neighbor makes a citizen's arrest or whatever, I applaud the guy who's stopping the child abuser. So just because I favor using violence against children, as in holding them down to change their diaper, or giving them a timeout, which is really kidnapping, I don't favor child abuse. That's horrible.
Yeah,
that's grotesque, and I think that ought to be stopped.
Yeah, and I think the way I draw the line on this, or the way I consider, it took me a long time to comprehend this and to try to integrate it into the way I parent. But you know, the way I resolved it in my head is that if I'm inflicting this violence in a way that is meant to inflict pain and suffering for the purpose of behavior modification, then I've stepped over the line. If I'm doing it to protect the child in the moment, if, you know, maybe there could be a time when they need a timeout. Maybe they're just having a huge tantrum and they're wanting to throw things around and stuff. Okay, we need to confine you for a bit. Let's wait till you calm down. Time out. Confine you. Okay, let's talk about this now. But I think if you know, in my head, what crosses the line, at least in terms of my own values, is I consider it initiatory force if I'm going beyond that and using punitive, trying to make the child uncomfortable, trying to inflict pain or discomfort or whatever, in to get a behavior modification. That to me is not that's not the reason why I want them to behave well. And so I think that in some way teaches a child to either, well, it teaches them that power is virtue in a sense, right? In that, but if I keep it to protective force, then I'm not. That's how I
think that's an interesting distinguishment between that and pulling a child back from stepping into a shark cage or whatever.
Sure.
Well, you know, you talk about motivation as opposed to objective action. I would tend toward the other way. I would look not so much the motivation, although the motivation is not irrelevant, but to me even more important is the objective physical act. If it's too harsh, even if it's with good motivation, I would say that's child abuse. And on the other hand, if it's just, you know, a light tap like that, even with bad motivation, I would say that's okay. But you know, these are sort of difficult issues to get across as to. My understanding, I mean, most parents lose their temper every once in a while, and they swat the kid who's really behaving badly, and they do it with bad motivations. I wouldn't call that child abuse, although I agree with you. Ideally, you shouldn't do it. You should be more judicial and more cool about it, and you say, I'm just, this hurts me more than it hurts you, but I got to do it for your sake. I think that's ideal, so I agree with you there. But in terms of legality, first of all, it's hard to know what the motivation is, and so I would veer more toward the objective action.
What do you think of you know, Molyneux's idea that the state emerges from the family, that you know, this power structure in the family of top-down initiatory force, from that is where the state emerges?
And I'm familiar that you have a great deal of respect for Molyneux in a lot of regards, but you also have your points of contention. Oh
yeah, I'm a big fan of Stefan Molyneux. He's a great guy. He's done marvelous work. But I did have an hour-and-a-half debate with him on this very issue of child abuse or child whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the motivation for the state. That's too Freudian for me. I think the motivation for the state is socio-biological, which I can go into if you want. But that's a relatively unimportant issue as to what the motivation is. The key is, do you have a right to use force against kids? And Stefan was saying no at the beginning of the debate, but toward the end, I think I convinced him, because he said, I'll have to think about that.
Right.
And when I have a debating partner who says, I'll have to think about that, I don't want to pile on and say, ha, you know, I'm right, you're wrong. You know, I sort of let the debate go and say, okay, well, you know, think about it, whatever. But to me, he's now a Blockian on this issue. He agrees that on certain cases it's okay, it's not illegal, it's not a violation of the non-aggression principle to use force, violence against the kid, gently, no child abuse, God forbid. But, you know, the rational thing is, you know, anyone who's ever had a kid knows, you know, kids are uncivilized little beings, and you have to, for their own sake, and also to deliver them as adults in good shape, you have to use force. And so I think he has now agreed with that. Now, as to the cause of the state, he might be right, that you know, the father figure or the mother figure later transcends into the state. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that one. So he might well be right on that.
Well, you know, just I've had some of my own thoughts on that very issue. I know Stefan way back from the 90s. We were former objectivists, so we've had these powwows and talks, and so it's interesting to see a lot of our conversations take place, come to the foreground in his videos, you know. But we've talked about this very thing where, you know, we're looking at here's the individual that's born into a certain society, and there's like these three powerful paradigms that comes tumbling down on the individual, and it's all of an authoritarian because I said so orientation. You have the church, do A, B, and C, or God will burn your ass forever.
Right.
You have the parents saying do A, B, or C, or time out, spanking, and then you have this the state says do A, B, or C, or you find yourself in an orange jumpsuit. You know, so it is like a inundation of authoritarian ethic that's being inculcated into the kid, and they're like reinforcing paradigms. You have the state with all the familial slogans, you know, Fatherland, Mother Russia,
right.
Uncle Sam, you know, so Homeland Security, right? So I think that there's credibility to this. And it might sound very Freudian and very esoteric, I understand.
Well, and one of the things too that has come up, you know, there are some very staunch, you know, people who say, well, you have the right to you know, kick your kids out of the house, and like you don't have an obligation to
love it or leave it, pal.
Right?
You don't have an obligation to what?
To your children or something.
To feed them, you mean?
Well, yeah, to provide the necessities of life. You can essentially wild them or something like that. But you know, my argument to that is, look, you did an action that created a helpless human being. It would kind of be like, you know, to me, maybe pushing someone over the edge of the cliff and then catching them at the last second. Their lives hang in the balance because of actions you took.
Yeah.
You kind of have an obligation then to pull them back over that cliff, or else you're a murderer. Now, you know, if someone trips and is about to go over a cliff and you grab them and you're in danger of being, you know, you really probably don't have an obligation to hold that person up. But if you push them there, put them in that position, well, I think you kind of have an obligation at that point. Or if you take someone out on a boat and you contract, and you know, the person goes out on a boat with you, and suddenly the relationship sours, and you say, I don't like you anymore, I'm evicting you from my property, I have no obligation to you. Well, it's certain death for that person, but I think you have an obligation to that person to provide for them until maybe another ship comes and you can transfer custodianship to another ship, or you can get them back to land or something like that. I would argue that the same type of principle applies to a kid. You've created a helpless human being through your actions, and therefore you have an obligation to either make sure they get to another custodian, an adoptive parent or something like that, or provide the necessities of life. What do you guys think of that idea?
Well, what you're really talking about is the abortion issue.
Oh, okay.
Or pro-life or pro-choice. And here libertarians are very, very... Well, I wanted to talk about two things. One is this hierarchical thing of authoritarianism. There's nothing wrong with authoritarianism per se. In an orchestra, not only does the orchestra conductor tell the violinist when to play, he even tells the wind players when to breathe. If they breathe at the wrong time, he hits the podium and says, you jerk, start breathing when I tell you to breathe.
Sure. Now,
that's pretty authoritarian. And yet there are there's this debate between thick and thin libertarians, and the thick libertarians add on a whole bunch of things. You know, I say libertarianism has no position on outside issues. Well, authoritarianism is an outside issue. You can be as authoritarian as you want as long as it's voluntary. And the tuba player is there voluntarily. So if the conductor tells them when to breathe, you better breathe when the conductor tells them. Now, on this abortion issue, this is an issue that not only divides libertarians, it divides everybody. I mean, we have pro-choice and pro-life, and there's no seeming reconciliation. I mean, you have Murray Rothbard, who is a pro-choice person. He believes that life starts when birth starts, and the 8-month-old fetus can be killed because it's not a human being yet. You have Ron Paul, who is pro-life, and yet the two of them are very, very similar in every other way. Yeah. And I have come up with a compromise, and I've written about it since, I don't know, 1970, and I'm going to probably come out with a book on it because I've got maybe 15 or 20 articles on it. And my view is a compromise. And I call it a principled compromise. Like if Victor says 2 + 2 is 4, and Tim says 2 + 2 is 6, and I say 2 + 2 is 5 as a compromise, that's an unprincipled compromise. That's just adding them up and dividing by 2. I think I have a principled compromise, and the principled compromise I call is evictionism. Now, you see, the problem is that abortion is really a complex word. It's eviction plus killing. And we have to separate those two. Whereas the pro-life people say you can't evict before birth at 9 months and you can't kill. The pro-life people say you can evict and you can kill. Like they have this thing, partial birth abortion in the 8th month. They go in, they suck the baby's brains out, and then they pull the baby out dead. They say you have a right to do that. So the libertarian compromise, as I see it, is you have a right to evict, but not to kill. Now, right now, if we adopt this, all babies in the last trimester will be saved. Because you can only evict, you can't kill. You can't. Babies in the 7th, 8th, and 9th month are viable outside the womb, and they're all saved. And the beauty of this, if I may say so, is that in 10 years it might be the 6th month. Right. And in 50 years, the 5th month, and in 100 years, maybe the fertilized egg will be able to be alive in a good test tube or something. So if we adopt evictionism, eventually we will win. I'm sort of pro-life. I believe that life starts with the fertilized egg. By the way, you know in the Jewish tradition when life starts? When the fetus graduates medical school.
There you go.
But I believe that it's the fertilized egg is when life starts, because the egg alone won't become a human being no matter where it's put. The sperm alone won't become a human being no matter where it's put. The fertilized egg will become a human being if it's put in the right environment, and which is the same for us. Right. We'll die if we're not in the right environment, if we're out in space or something. Okay, so I'm getting to this point about the boat. Relinquishing people and stuff like that.
Evicting them. Yeah.
Evicting them. And I say you have a right to evict. However, there are implicit contracts. If you invite me on your boat and now we're 300 miles out and I can only swim 200 miles, and you say, well, you know, you're a libertarian, I didn't realize it, get off my boat. We have an implicit contract. Right. That you should, you know, as you say, get me to another boat or get me to shore or, you know, something. Give me a little rowboat, you know, in some way, because there's an implicit contract. But for there to be an implicit contract, there have to be two people, you and I. However, at the time of intercourse, forgetting about the father, there is no one with whom to have an implicit contract, because intercourse occurs and then the sperm goes up the fallopian tubes or some tubes or other and hits the egg. You can't have an implicit contract with a non-existing person. The only implicit contract you could have is with the man who impregnates you. You're the woman, and here you have this, if you have a surrogate mother contract, you know, you and your wife can't have a baby, say, and you hire a surrogate mother to do it and you pay her. Well, now it's not an implicit contract, that's an explicit contract, and if she has an eviction, she's in violation of the contract, and you should be able to force her to go the full 9 months. But forgetting about that, you have no obligation. And also in the case of rape, and you know, all babies have equal rights. The baby who is a product of rape is just as innocent as any other baby, and there's no implicit contract that the woman who is raped has a contract with anyone to keep the baby. So I say you have a right. See, I'm pro-life in the 3rd trimester, and I'm pro-choice in the first 2 trimesters. And I say that as time goes on, we'll move more toward saving babies. So this is the evictionist theory. You have a right to evict. You have no right to kill.
Right, and that's interesting because I was asked that by some big supporters of fundamentalist Christians. The first question they asked me was, "What are your thoughts on abortion?" And I was like, okay, let me see if I can tackle this one. But you know, ultimately the answer I came up with was, look, I want to see less abortions. I think everyone wants to see less abortions. Can we think of a way of solving this without using force or violence against a woman? I mean, you can, you know, enshrine in a law or a thing that you can use protective force. You can actually protect an extra-utero baby, a baby that's outside, and you can escalate force, comply or die to the mom, cease and desist your attempts to murder that baby. But if you just pragmatically can't. You might be able to do it in the 3rd trimester. You might be able to say, stop, cease and desist, we're going to cut that baby out of you to save its life, because you're trying to murder it. You could potentially do that. And potentially, you know, like you say, as technology increases, I don't think it's pragmatic at this point probably to do that. I think it, you know, probably puts mom and baby at greater risk, because you can't kill the mom without killing the baby when it's in utero. So whether you think that baby's a person or not is irrelevant. If you assume that it's a person, escalating force to the point of death to the mom is going to kill the very thing that you're trying to save, the very person that you're trying to save. It would be the same as, Victor, if we shrunk you up, put you inside of Walter, and and Walter was intent on killing you. Well, I'm not sure that I could stop him and save your life.
Oh no, I think you should. I think you should stop him.
Well,
stop me from killing him, because he's an alive person. He's a little small.
But if his life is literally connected to yours, in other words, if you die, he dies. Well, then we have a pragmatic issue here, and we're going to end up with two dead people instead of one, right?
Well, my advice to you when asked this as a libertarian is say, look, libertarians differ on this.
Sure.
There is no one libertarian position on that.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way. A more complicated way is to give them this compromise position.
Yeah.
Although that takes a bit of doing.
Yeah.
But the easiest answer for a politician who's representing the Libertarian Party is to say, look, libertarians, like everybody else, are in great disagreement over that, and I have my own personal views on that, which I'm not going to share with you because I'm now on the podium as a libertarian. Talk to me afterward and I'll give you my views, but as a libertarian representative, I say we have no view on that because we're very divided, as is the whole country.
Yeah. I mean, the things we can say are there are things we can do to decrease the incentives for unwanted pregnancies and abortions, right? I don't think people should have to pay for another person to have an abortion. I don't think
that's something that probably has to be looked into, right, to avoid these type of problems in the first place. I find your ideas on that very interesting, Walter, very persuasive. And my position always been, and I'm considering what you're talking about, but my position has always been one of the pro-choice movement, which is not to say that a lot of people think, oh, pro-life, have the kid, pro-choice, don't abort the kid. No, pro-choice also includes making the decision to have the child. Now, you say that children are not full rights-bearing creatures, right? That's where, and the issue for me is always in the third trimester. After that, it just becomes, it's abhorrent, right?
Right.
But in the third trimester, that's always been the point of contention, that if a child, a baby outside of the womb is not a full rights-bearing creature, a embryo or mass of protoplasm, how much is that to the actual woman who's an actual versus a potential, right? Who takes prominence in that case, right? Right. And this doesn't mean that their ethics is not into consideration. I mean, like a woman who uses birth control or abortion as a form of birth control is an abhorrent person, right?
And there's another thing that occurs to me as well, and Richard Dawkins made this distinction, I think, when he was talking about abortion, is that, with medical technology, now it's conceivable, it may even be possible now to take a skin cell and turn that into a person through cloning technology under the right conditions. So that cell has the ability now to become a person. So the idea that an embryo or the sperm and the egg joining together has the potential to become a person, can you then extend that to your skin cells and say that when you scratch your nose you're committing genocide or something like that?
To say nothing of non-procreational sex masturbation.
And then to take the Orthodox Jew position, which is, every time you don't have sex, it's basically equivalent to an abortion. during fertilization, I mean, you're commanded to go out and procreate. That's a potential human you're destroying there by not having sex.
Well, I think we're getting into science fiction.
Sure.
I mean, I certainly don't think if you refrain from sex while your wife is ovulating that you're a murderer. I mean, that's a little...
How dare you?
A little difficult.
It's a big stretch.
I'm now scratching my nose, and I've killed 300,000 people. I mean, I think that's science fiction. But getting back to reality, we also have to reconcile this with there are no positive obligations in libertarianism. They're only negative. We believe in negative rights, not positive rights. There's no right to food. By the way, another way to stop abortions is to stop welfare.
Sure.
Because some people have babies in order to get welfare.
I've heard a lot of cases.
That's a great other reason to get rid of welfare. I mean, there are many reasons to get rid of the welfare system, but that's an additional one. We'd have fewer of that problem. But the key, let's take the case, suppose we have a baby, and the baby is in the bedroom, and we just decide not to feed him. And, he's crying, but the hell with him. Do we have a positive obligation to feed him?
I would say we do.
Well, I would say we don't. We don't have a positive obligation to feed him, but we do have an obligation to bring him to the orphanage or to the church or to the hospital or somewhere, because. And now, how do I reconcile that with no positive obligations? Why do we have an obligation to bring him there?
To do that much, yeah.
To do that much.
Yeah.
And my answer is a thing called forestalling. Now, everybody has to picture a bagel or a donut with a hole in the middle, and then there's the bagel, and then there's the outside area. Could you possibly homestead land in the form of a bagel? Namely, leaving the middle part open. Let's say it's a square mile, and you homestead the area around it, say 9 square miles, and you just leave that little checkerboard open, and no one else can get it. And my claim is you cannot. Because the idea of homesteading is that everything has to be privatized, and here what you're doing is you're controlling an area that you never touched.
Right.
So you can't do it because you're forestalling, because other people want to get there and you're not letting them through. You're preventing, you're forestalling. Well, I regard the baby as the hole in the donut. If you leave the baby there and you don't bring him to the orphanage or to the hospital or the church or synagogue or whatever where people will take care of him, what you're doing is the same thing as you're doing forestalling land homesteading. Namely, you're preventing other people from being the guardian. See, babies, the parent is the guardian, and the only way to keep guardianship is to keep guarding. And if you stop feeding them, even for one meal, you've renounced your guardianship and you're keeping them.
Right.
What you're doing is forestalling other people who would like to be the guardian. Now, suppose there was a kid who nobody in the world, you take him to the orphanage and the orphanage says no. And you take him to the hospital, you take him here, and nobody in the whole world wants to take care of this baby. Then and only then must this baby die. Because there are no positive obligations to keep the baby alive, in my view, as a libertarian. But this is, again, science fiction-ish.
Right.
There's always going to be friends of babies, organizations that are going to want to take every baby.
Brutal society.
Yeah. And what would you make of the? I take it from a slightly different tack. What would you say that I have a public? Say I slip some poison into your orange juice, and then I tell you about that you're and I have the antidote. Do I have a positive obligation to give you the antidote or correct the situation?
I wouldn't say it's a positive obligation. Right. I would say you have an obligation to not be a murderer.
Right.
Because if the stuff stays there without the antidote...
But I committed an action that will lead to your certain death. But wouldn't you say the same is true of creating a baby? You've created an action that's going to lead to certain death unless you take positive action. And so I don't want to be a murderer, so I don't want to create a being that's surely going to die.
Well, first of all,
if I don't do something.
First of all, this is the case of rape. The problem with that line of thinking, and I appreciate your point, but in the case of rape, the woman didn't take any positive obligation, and I think she can evict the baby in the first 2 trimesters, even though it'll be certain death at today's medical technology. Yeah. So that would be a perfect example. And the other one is, does she have a contract? Now, you see, there's another way. According to the Mormons, there are spirits out there. Somehow, I'm not really up on Mormonism, but there are spirits out there. So the question is, did you improve the baby's chances by calling it out of the ether, wherever it is?
Oh, yeah.
And I say, yes, you improved it. It's sort of like the case, he pushes me out of the onrushing truck, but there's a river over there. He can't swim, so he pushes me out of the ongoing truck, and now I'm in the water.
Right.
And I'm drowning. And I'm calling Victor. Victor, help me. And Victor says, well, I did one thing. I've done enough. Leave me alone. I'm busy. Is he a murderer? Right. And I say, no, he's not a murderer. He improved my situation by keeping me alive for another minute.
Sure.
Say. So, you see, there I would reject your analogy like you drop somebody off the cliff, and now do you have an obligation to grab his foot and pull him back?
Right.
You see, when you put poison in my orange juice, and you shouldn't do that.
I know.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
I'm kind of devious.
Okay.
He's a politician.
That's what I do.
Right.
I'm learning my craft, my trade craft.
See, you didn't improve my situation. There's this analogy. In the case of giving birth, I improved that kid's situation. I kept them alive for 5 months or a month or whatever it was.
Right.
So there's this analogy. See, I have maybe 15 articles that I've written on this, and then maybe 15 people have criticized me, some along the lines that you're doing. And then I have 15 other articles trying to respond to that.
Gotcha.
And anyone out there interested in this, just email me and I'll send you more than you want to read. Well, it's a whole book's worth. I really should get a book published on this because I think it's a breakthrough because nobody else talks about a compromise, a principal compromise.
Right.
And this is a principal compromise, and I appreciate your criticisms of it because if it can't withstand criticisms, then it's not a good compromise. Well, I'll just end by saying it was a pleasure to talk with these guys, and we're all pretty much on the same page, but we have subtle differences, and that's what libertarianism is. We're not perfect. We don't know all the answers, but we're trying as best we can to promote liberty.
Yeah.
Amen, brother.
Yeah,
So
and like we're all in agreement on the broad principles, and any differences just as comes to a matter of interpretation, maybe in an application of those principles.
Yeah, and I am not convinced that we have any disagreements whatsoever. I don't know yet. Maybe we can disagree that we agree, right? But no, I think that I don't know the ultimate truth, and I'm on this path of exploration. I think liberty is a journey, and trying to refine these. I think these are important conversations to have.
Hi, I'm Walter Block. I'm a professor of economics at Loyola University, New Orleans, and I'm a senior fellow with the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. If you want to get some good stuff on libertarianism in Vancouver, check out LibertyMingle.ca.